Welcome to True Voice Shorts, a curated audio series that brings fiction, memoir, and reimagined classics to life, honoring language, voice, and the legacy of storytelling. This story is part of our Whispers of Forgotten Women series, where hidden voices from history rise again. Authors whose words once struggled to find their place still echo with power today. Today's story is an adaptation of Miss Grief by Constance Fenimore Woolson. Miss Grief was published in May 1877 in Lippincott's Monthly Magazine, a general interest monthly that blended literature and culture. Its author, Constance Fenimore Woolson, was the grandniece of James Fenimore Cooper, an early American novelist best known for The Last of the Mohicans, but her voice and her vision were entirely her own. Writing from Rome, Woolson observed the world of artists, authors, and social climbers with a precise and often haunting clarity. Miss Grief is one of her most enduring short stories, a quietly devastating portrait of female genius overlooked, dismissed, and ultimately misunderstood. With sharp irony and aching restraint, Woolson gives us a mirror not just of 19th century literary society, but of how brilliance too often goes unseen. Miss Grief. A conceited fool is a not uncommon expression. Now I know that I am not a fool, but I also know that I am conceited. But candidly, can it be helped if one happens to be young, well and strong, passably good-looking, and with some money that one has inherited and more than one has earned? In all, enough to make life comfortable. And if upon this foundation rests also the pleasant superstructure of a literary success, success is deserved, I think. Certainly it is not lightly gained. Even with this, I fully appreciate its rarity. Thus, I find myself very well entertained in life. I have all I wish in the way of society, and a deep, though of course carefully concealed, satisfaction in my own little fame, which fame I foster by a gentle system of non-interference. I know that I am spoken of as that quiet young fellow who writes those delightful little studies of society, you know, and I live up to that definition. A year ago, I was in Rome and enjoying life particularly. I had a large number of my acquaintances there, both American and English, and no day passed without its invitation. Of course, I understood it. It is seldom that you find a literary man who is good-tempered, well-dressed, sufficiently provided with money, and obedient to all the rules and requirements of society. When found, make a note of it, and the note was generally an invitation. One evening, upon returning to my lodgings, my man Simpson informed me that a person had called in the afternoon, and upon learning that I was absent had left not a card, but her name, Miss Grief. The title lingered, Miss Grief. Grief had not so far visited me here. I dismissed Simpson, and seeking my little balcony for my final smoke, thought, and she shall not now. I shall take care to not be at home to her if she continues to call. And then I fell to thinking of Isabel Abercrombie, in whose society I had spent that and many evenings. They were golden thoughts. The next day there was an excursion. It was late when I reached my rooms, and again Simpson informed me that Miss Grief had called. Is she coming continuously? I asked to myself. Yes, sir. She mentioned that she would call again. How does she look? Well, sir, a lady, but not so prosperous as she was, I would say. Young? No, sir. Alone. A maid with her, sir. But once outside on my little high-up balcony with my cigar, I again forgot Miss Grief, and whatever she might represent. Who would not forget in that moonlight with Isabel Abercrombie's face to remember? The stranger came a third time, and I was absent. Then she let 2 days pass and began again. It grew to be a regular dialogue between Simpson and myself when I came in at night. "Grief today?" "Yes, sir." "What time?" "4, sir." Happy the man, I thought, who could keep her confined to a particular hour. But I should not have treated my visitor so cavalierly if I had not felt sure she was eccentric or unconventional, qualities extremely tiresome in a woman no longer young or attractive. If she were not eccentric, she would not have persisted in coming to my door day after day in this silent way, without stating her errand, leaving a note, or presenting her credentials in any shape. I made up my mind that she had something to sell, a bit of carving or some intaglio supposed to be an antique. It was known that I had a fancy for such oddities. I said to myself, she has read or heard of my old gold story, or else the buried god, and she thinks me an idolizing ignoramus upon who she can impose. Her sepulchral name is at least not Italian. Probably she is a sharp countrywoman of mine, turning, by means of the present aesthetic craze, an honest penny where she can. She had called 7 times during a period of 2 weeks without seeing me, when one day I happened to be home in the afternoon, owing to pouring rain and a fit of doubt concerning Miss Abercrombie. I do not know a more exasperating frame of mind, at least for a constructor of theories. I could not write, and so I took up a French novel. I modeled myself a little on Balzac. I had been turning over its pages but a few moments when Simpson knocked, and entering softly said, with just a shadow of a smile on his well-trained face, "Miss Grief." I briefly consigned Miss Grief to all the Furies, and then, as he still lingered, I asked where the visitor was. "Outside, sir, in the hall. I told her I would see if you were at home. She must be unpleasantly wet if she had no carriage." "No carriage, sir. They always come on foot. I think she is a little damp, sir." "Well, let her in, but I don't want the maid. I may as well see her now, I suppose, and end the affair." "Yes, sir." I did not put down my book. My visitor should have a hearing, but not much more. She had sacrificed her womanly claims by her persistent attacks upon my door. Presently, Simpson ushered her in. "Miss Grief," he said, and then went out, closing the curtain behind him. A woman, yes, a lady, but shabby, unattractive, and more than middle-aged. I rose, bowed slightly, and then dropped into my chair again, still keeping the book in my hand. "Miss Grief?" I said as I indicated a seat with my eyebrows. "Not Grief," she answered. "Grief. My name is Grief." She sat down, and I saw she held a small flat box. Not a carving, then, I thought. Probably some old lace or something that belonged to Tulula or Lucretia Borgia. But as she did not speak, I found myself obliged to begin. "You have been here, I think, once or twice before?" 7 times. This is the 8th. A silence. "I am often out. Indeed, I may say I am never in," I remarked carelessly. "Yes. You have many friends." "Who will perhaps buy old lace," I mentally added. But this time I, too, remained silent. Why should I trouble myself to draw her out? She had sought me. Let her advance her idea, whatever it was, now that the entrance had been gained. But Miss Grief, I preferred to call her that, did not look as though she would advance anything. Her black gown, damp with rain, seemed to retreat fearfully to her thin self, while her thin self retreated as far as possible from me, from the chair, from everything. Her eyes were cast down. An old-fashioned lace veil with a heavy border shaded her face. She looked at the floor, and I looked at her. I grew a little impatient, but I made up my mind that I would continue silent and see how long a time she would consider necessary to give due effect to her little pantomime. Comedy, or was it tragedy? I suppose the full 5 minutes passed thus in our double silence, and that is a long time when two people are sitting opposite each other, alone in a small, still room. At last my visitor, without raising her eyes, said slowly, "You are very happy, are you not, with youth, health, friends, riches, and fame?" It was a singular beginning. Her voice was clear, low, and very sweet as she thus enamored my advantages one by one in a list. I was attracted by it, but repelled by her word, which seemed to me flattery both dull and bold. "Thanks for your kindness, but I fear it is undeserved. I seldom discuss myself, even with my friends." "I am your friend," replied Miss Grief. Then, after a moment, she added slowly, "I have read every word you have written." I curled the pages of my book indifferently. I am not a flop, I hope, but others have said the same. "What is more, I know much of it by heart," continued my visitor. "Wait, I will show you." And then, without pause, she began to repeat something of mine word for word, just as I had written it. On she went, and I listened. I intended interrupting her after a moment, but I did not, because she was reciting so well, and also because I felt a desire gaining upon me to see what she would make of a certain conversation which I knew was coming. A conversation between two of my characters which was, to say the least, sphinx-like, and somewhat incandescent as well. What won me a little, too, was the fact that the scene she was reciting, it was hardly more than that, though called a story, was secretly my favorite among all the sketches from my pen which a gracious public had received with favor. I never said so, but it was. And I had always felt a wondering annoyance at the aforesaid public, while kindly praising beyond their worth other attempts, had never noticed the higher purpose of this little shaft, aimed not at the balconies and lighted windows of society, but straight up towards the distant stars. So she went on, and presently reached the conversation. My two people began to talk. She had raised her eyes now and was looking at me soberly as she gave the words of the woman, quiet, gentle, cold, and the replies of the man, bitter, hot, and scathing. Her very voice changed, and took, though not always sweetly, the different tones required. And while no point of meaning, however small, no breath of delicate emphasis which I had meant, but which the dull types could not give, escaped an appreciative and full, almost over-full recognition which startled me. For she had understood me almost better than I understood myself. It seemed to me that while I had labored to interpret a psychological riddle, she, coming after, had comprehended its bearings better than I had, though confining herself strictly to my own words and emphasis. The scene ended, and it ended rather suddenly. She dropped her eyes and moved her hand nervously to and fro over the box she held. Her gloves were old and shabby, her hands small. I was secretly much surprised by what I had heard, but my ill temper was deep-seated that day, and I felt sure that the box contained something which I was expected to buy. "You recite remarkably well," I said carelessly, "and I am much flattered also by your appreciation of my attempt, but it is not, I presume, to that alone that I owe the pleasure of this visit." "Yes," she answered, still looking down, "it is, for if you had not written that scene, I should not have sought you. Your other sketches are interiors, exquisitely painted and delicately finished, but of small scope. This is a sketch in a few bold, masterly lines, work of entirely different spirit and purpose." I was nettled by her insight. You have bestowed so much of your kind attention upon me that I feel your debtor. It may be that there is something I can do for you, connected possibly with that little box. It wasn't pertinent, but it was true, for she answered yes. I smiled, but her eyes were cast down and she did not see the smile. What I have to show you is a manuscript, she said after a pause which I did not break. It is a drama. I thought that perhaps you would read it. An authoress. This is worse than old lace, I said to myself in dismay. Then aloud, my opinion would be worth nothing, Miss Grief. Not in a business way, I know, but it might be an assistance, personally. Her voice had sunk to a whisper. Outside, the rain was pouring steadily down. She was a very depressing object to me as she sat there with her box. I hardly think I have time at the present, I began. She had raised her eyes and was looking at me. Then, when I paused, she rose and came suddenly toward my chair. Yes, you will read it, she said with her hand on my arm. You will read it. Look at this room. Look at yourself. Look at all you have. Then look at me and have pity. I had risen, for she held my arm and her damp skirt was brushing my knee. Her large dark eyes looked intently at mine as she went on. I have no shame in asking. Why should I have? It is my last endeavor, but a calm and well-considered one. If you refuse, I shall go away knowing that fate has willed it so, and I shall be content. She is mad, I thought, but she did not look so, and she had spoken quietly, even gently. Sit down, I said, moving away from her. I felt as if I had been magnetized, but it was only the nearness of her eyes to mine and their intensity. I drew forward a chair, but she remained standing. I cannot, she said in the same sweet, gentle tone, unless you promise. Very well, I promise. Only sit down. As I took her arm to lead her to the chair, I perceived that she was trembling, but her face continued unmoved. You do not, of course, mean me to look at your manuscript now, I said, temporalizing. It would be much better to leave it. Give me your address, and I will return it to you with my written opinion, though, I repeat, the latter will be of no use to you. It is the opinion of an editor or publisher that you want. It shall be as you please, and I will go in a moment, said Miss Grief, pressing her palms together as if trying to control the tremor that had seized her slight frame. She looked so pallid that I thought of offering her a glass of wine. Then I remembered that, if I did, it might be a bait to bring her here again, and this I was desirous to prevent. She rose while the thought was passing through my mind. Her pasteboard box lay on the chair she had first occupied. She took it, wrote an address on the cover, laid it down, and then, bowing with a little air of formality, drew her black shawl around her shoulders and turned towards the door. I followed after touching the bell. You will hear from me by letter, I said. Simpson opened the door, and I caught a glimpse of the maid who was waiting in the anteroom. She was an old woman, shorter than her mistress, equally thin, and dressed like her in rusty black. As the door opened, she turned toward it with a pair of small, dim blue eyes with a look of suspense. Simpson dropped the curtain, shutting me into the interior room. He had no intention of allowing me to accompany my visitor further, but I had the curiosity to go to a bay window in an angle from whence I could command the street door, and presently I saw them issue forth into the rain and walk away side by side. It grew dark. I was invited out for the evening, and I knew that if I should go, I should meet Miss Abercrombie. I said to myself that I would not go. I got out my paper for writing. I made my preparations for a quiet evening at home with myself, but it was of no use. It all ended savagely in my going. At the last moment, I presented myself, and as a punishment for my vacillation, I suppose, I never spent a more disagreeable evening. I drove homeward in a murky temper. It was foggy without and very foggy within. What Isabel was, now that she had broken through my elaborately built theories, I was not able to decide. There was, to tell the truth, a certain young Englishman, but that is apart from this story. I reached home, went up to my room, and had supper. It was to console myself. I'm obliged to console myself scientifically once in a while. I was walking up and down afterward, smoking and feeling somewhat better, when my eye fell on the pasteboard box. I took it up. On the cover was written an address which showed that my visitor must have walked a long distance in order to see me. A. Creef. A grief, I thought, and so she was. I positively believed she has brought all this trouble upon me. She has the evil eye. I took out the manuscript and looked at it. It was in the form of a little volume and clearly written. On the cover was the word armor, and underneath a pen and ink sketch of a helmet, breastplate, and shield. Creef certainly needs armor, I said to myself, sitting down by the table and turning over the pages. I may as well look over the thing now. I could not be in a worse mood. And I began to read. Early the next morning, Simpson took a note from me to the given address, returning with the following reply. No, I prefer to come to you at 4 A. Creef. These words, with their 3 semicolons, were written in pencil upon a piece of coarse printing paper, but the handwriting was as clear and delicate as that of the manuscript in ink. What sort of place was it, Simpson? Very poor, sir. But I did not go all the way up. The elder person came down, sir, took the note, and asked me to wait where I was. You had no chance, then, to make inquiries? I said, knowing full well that he had emptied the entire neighborhood of any information it might possess concerning these 2 lodgers. Well, sir, you know how these foreigners will talk whether one wants to hear or not, but it seems that these 2 people have been there but a few weeks. They live alone. They are uncommonly silent and reserved. The people around there call them something that signifies the Madam's American, thin and dumb. At 4, the Madam's American arrived. It was raining again, and they came on foot under their old umbrella. The maid waited in the anteroom, and Miss Creef was ushered into my bachelor's parlor. I had thought that I should meet her with great deference, but she looked so forlorn that my deference changed to pity. It was the woman that impressed me then, more than the writer, the fragile, nervous body more than the inspired mind. For it was inspired. I had sat up half the night over her drama, and I had felt thrilled through and through more than once by its earnestness, passion, and power. No one could have been more surprised than I was to find myself thus enthusiastic. I thought I had outgrown that sort of thing, and one would have supposed, too, I myself should have supposed so the day before, that the faults of the drama, which were many and prominent, would have chilled any liking I might have felt. But being a writer myself, and therefore critical, for writers are as apt to make much of the how and rather than the what as painters, who it is well known prefer an exquisitely rendered representation of a commonplace theme to an imperfectly executed picture of even the most striking subject. But in this case, on the contrary, the scattered rays of splendor in Miss Creef's drama had made me forget the dark spots, which were numerous and disfiguring, or rather the splendor that had made me anxious to have the spots removed. And this also was a philanthropic state very unusual with me. Regarding unsuccessful writers, my motto had been, Vae Victis. My visitor took a seat and folded her hands. I could see, in spite of her quiet manner, that she was in breathless suspense. It seemed so pitiful that she should be trembling there before me, a woman so much older than I, a woman who possessed the divine spark of genius, which I was by no means sure, in spite of my success, had been granted to me. and I felt as I ought to go down on my knee before her and entreat her to take her proper place of supremacy at once. But there, one does not fall to one's knees before a woman over 50, plain in feature, thin, dejected, and ill-dressed. I contented myself with taking her hands in their miserable old gloves in mine while I said cordially, "Miss Creef, your drama seems to me full of original power. It has roused my enthusiasm. I sat up half the night reading it." The hands I held shook, but something made me tighten my hold and bestow upon her a reassuring smile. She looked at me for a moment, and then, suddenly and noiselessly, tears rose and rolled down her cheeks. I dropped her hands and retreated. I had not thought her tearful. On the contrary, her voice and face seemed rigidly controlled. But now, here, she was bending herself over the side of the chair with her head resting on her arms, not sobbing loud, but her whole frame shaken by the strength of her emotion. I rushed for a glass of wine and pressed her to take it. I did not know quite what to do, but putting myself in her place, I decided to praise the drama, and praise it I did. I do not know when I have used so many adjectives. She raised her head and began to wipe her eyes. "Do take the wine," I said, interrupting myself in my torrent of overwhelming flow of words. "I dare not," she answered, and then added humbly, "that is, unless you have a biscuit here or a bit of bread." I found some biscuits. She ate two and then slowly drank the wine, while I resumed my verbal Niagara. Under its influence, and that of the wine too, perhaps, she began to show new life. It was not that she looked radiant, but simply that she looked warm. I now perceived that what had been the principal discomfort of her appearance heretofore, it was that she looked all the time as if suffering from cold. At last I could think of nothing more to say and stopped. I really admired the drama, but I thought I had exerted myself sufficiently as an anti-hysteric, and that adjectives enough, for the present at least, had been administered. She had put down her empty wine glass and was resting her arms on the broad, cushioned arms of her chair with, for a thin person, a sort of expanded content. "You must pardon my tears," she said, smiling. "It was the revulsion of feeling. My life was at a low ebb. If your sentence had been against me, it would have been my end." "Your end?" "Yes, the end of my life. I should have destroyed myself." "Then you would have been a weak as well as wicked woman," I said in a tone of disgust. I do hate sensationalism. "Oh no, you know nothing about it. I should have destroyed only this poor, worn containment of clay, but I can well understand how you would look upon it. Regarding the desirableness of life, the prince and the beggar may have different opinions. We shall say no more of it, but talk of drama instead." As she spoke the word drama, a triumphant brightness came to her eyes. I took the manuscript from the drawer and sat down beside her. "I suppose you know that there are faults," I said, expecting ready acquiescence. "I was not aware that there were any," was her gentle reply. Here was a beginning. After all my interest in her, and I may say under the circumstances my kindness, she received me in this way? However, my belief in her genius was too sincere to be altered by her whimsies, so I persevered. "Let us go over it together," I said. "Shall I read it to you, or will you read it to me?" "I will not read it, but recite it." "That will never do. You will recite it so well that we shall see only the good points, and what we have to concern ourselves with now is the bad ones." "I will recite it," she repeated. "Now, Miss Creef," I said bluntly, "for what purpose did you come to me? Certainly not merely to recite. I am no stage manager. Is it not the idea that I might help you in obtaining a publisher?" Yes, she answered, looking at me apprehensively, for all her old manner returning. I followed to my advantage, opening the little paper volume, and began. I first took the drama line by line and spoke of the faults of expression or structure. Then I turned back and touched upon the 2 or 3 glaring impossibilities in the plot. Your absorbed interest in the motive of the whole no doubt made you forget these blemishes, I said apologetically. But to my surprise, I found that she did not see the blemishes, that she appreciated nothing I had to say, comprehended nothing. Such unaccountable obtuseness puzzled me. I began again, going over the whole with even greater minuteness and care. I worked hard. The perspiration stood in beads upon my forehead as I struggled with her, what shall I call it, obstinacy? But it was not exactly obstinacy. She simply could not see the faults of her own work, no more than a blind man can see the smoke that dims a patch of blue sky. When I finished my task the second time around, she still remained as gently impassive as before. I leaned back in my chair exhausted and looked at her. In the end, Miss Grief really asks us, what does it cost to be seen? Woolson shows us a woman who cared more about the force and truth in her work than about smoothing it into something marketable. The narrator points out the flaws, even exaggerates them, but for her it didn't matter. She wasn't chasing polish or approval. She was holding on to her voice. And that choice leaves us with a lingering question. What happens when someone refuses to bow to convention and the world simply looks the other way?